Good afternoon. I'm Beth, and this is Around the Table Yarns, and we are doing an introduction really to stranded color work, also known as fair out color work. And I just wanted to start by showing the stranded color work sweater that I made not too long ago. This is a good example of what stranded color work can look like. Although there are multiple colors involved in this sweater, there are only 2 colors per row for the most part. I think there might be a couple of places where there was a different color, like in the center here. That's a 3rd color in between the brown and the tan. There's like a red in the center. But otherwise, it is pretty much 2 colors in each row, which is a trademark of Fair Isle knitting, which is another name that stranded color work is given. The reason that it's called stranded color work, using colors in knitting mean that you need to use more than 1 color in a row. We had an intarsia class not so long ago, and 2 colors in the row were done in blocks of color, with each color having its own source of yarn. In stranded color work, this is the inside of my sweater, and with the white particularly, you can see that there are strands of yarn being carried behind. So when the yarn, when the second color is not in use, the strand of that color is carried behind on the wrong side of the fabric. And what that does is it creates this extra texture on the back of strands of yarn. It thickens your fabric, and it also creates a little bit of inelasticity. So intarsia, we talked about, was very elastic. Stripes are very elastic, but stranded color work, because of the nature of these single strands of yarn held behind, are not very elastic. So one thing that we're going to talk about a lot today is how do we maintain some elasticity in our stranded color work knitting. I hear the grumpy noises of a corgi left outside. Hang on. Have to let the corgi in. Thank you, Miss Jenny. I'm not eating lunch. Hopefully she won't complain about not getting lunch. What it is good for is that the 2 colors, because one is knitted in the front or purled, and one is stranded behind, it creates a double thickness of fabric. And so the yokes and the hems and the cuffs that have been worked in stranded color work are warmer and thicker than their single color alternatives. So it was originally designed to create warmth on your sweater so that you could go outside and work in your sweater. We typically see charts in stranded color work, and that's going to have me go straight to the camera and go to the video camera to show you an example of a color work chart. I'm just going to bring that down and turn it upside down. Upside down is that way. There we go. So this is a very, it's wrong side up. I can't tell which way is right side up. Here we go. There we go. That's correct. So again, as I did for the intarsia class, I'm using our book by Margaret Radcliffe, is the author, and this is the Essential Guide to Color Knitting Techniques. And she is an excellent teacher who has created a very clear, this is a very nice guide to almost every kind of color technique that you would want to try to do. So down here, you can see the chart is done like on a graph paper, and each row, because stranded color work is primarily done in the round, and the reason for that, I'm trying to get this kind of straight on here. There we go. All right. So stranded color work is primarily done in the round. You can do it back and forth, but if you purl, the strands or the floats of yarn are in your way to see your stitches. And so most communities that did color work like this, who did stranded color work, would find ways to work always in the round. Even if they were going to open up the sweater to be a cardigan, or even if they were making something that would be used flat, they might cut it open. And we're going to talk about steeks, which is one of the ways of cutting open a sweater or cutting open a piece of stranded color work. So when something is done in the round, then the numbers will only lay on one side. So in this case, the numbers are on the right side of the chart. As you're looking at the chart, are the numbers on the left or the right?
Right.
On the right. Okay. So the numbers are on the right because we knit from right to left as we read. So we're coming from this direction and moving across the stitches. And so in our first round, we would look at this and we'd see lavender, 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 purple, lavender, 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 purple, lavender. So there's 3 stitches of lavender, 1 of purple. Now you could write that 3 lavender, 1 purple, repeat around, but seeing it like this, you can also see how it lines up with the next row. So many times when I talk about reading charts, and I'm not going to talk about reading charts a ton, but what I say is if you're going to read a chart, remember that you're reading it from right to left. You can cover up the lines that you're not on, and then you read it and then move it up so that you can continue to see what you've worked on and how it relates to what's, so don't put your line underneath, because then you can't see what you already have done. Put your piece of paper, your sticky, your tape, whatever above, and then you can see how that 1 relates to the 5 that comes above it. So reading charts is a very good way. I mean, you can look at color work and figure it out for yourself, but you can design it yourself on a piece of graph paper, and then you can follow your own chart by reading from the right side to the left and then seeing how each line of color interacts with each other. And what you'll also see up here, this is a pattern for a stranded hat. And here in row 30, you begin to see the decreases happening. And the decreases are double decreases occurring in this stitch. So the blank stitches are not there anymore. And so when you're reading a chart and there are increases or decreases, they will be represented by blank stitches, and you just skip over them. So you just pretend that's not there. So there is not, this is the very first stitch of that repeat of the chart. And you just pretend that this one here didn't exist at all. Okay. A stitch key is always essential in a chart. And the one here tells you what the blank squares look like. All of the blank squares are knit, and that's because this is done in the round and all of it's done in stockinette, so it's all knit. And then this symbol here, you can see, is the decrease. It's a centered double decrease. And then down here, you've got the 4 colors. And so the chart has everything you need to make this hat, except how many you have to cast on in the first place. Any questions about the chart? I think some of you
I have a question, Beth.
Certainly.
Is there a way I can see that a little bit better? I can't see any of the numbers or anything from where I am. Do I?
Can you see that the numbers are on the right-hand side?
No.
Where my finger is?
You're not in the screen with your finger.
My finger is not in the screen?
Now it is.
Now
the tip of it.
Okay. I didn't realize that the lowest inch is not visible. Okay, so the numbers are on the right-hand side, and they're just numbered 1 through 42 up the side.
Yeah, I know they should be. I was just wondering if there was a way can I make your frame larger?
You can pin my frame.
Pin it.
On the right-hand side of the frame that I am in, the little window that I'm in, if you hover over the right-hand corner, top right-hand corner, It should give you 3 dots.
Yep.
Click on those dots. It should say pin.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I know we're assuming everybody knows all of the tricks to zooming, but we still all haven't done them all. Okay, is that better? Okay. All right, so that's the chart. And really, for stranded color work, charts like this are very helpful in following them. And the most important thing is it gives you the relative position of where each stitch is happening. So if you're working from a chart, what you're getting is a representation of the right side of your fabric, what it should look like. And also, like, this area is one repeat. So all of these stitches are then repeated for each one of these sections around the hat. And so it condenses the amount of paper that you need to keep track of where your position is in your project. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about it being typically worked in the round. I'm going to go back to, got so many things in front of me. I'm going to go back to letting the corgi back out. It's a dog party. You want to go out? Out. Okay. They can't decide. Thank you.
What do you guys want?
When you give them something to eat.
Come here, Jen.
Go give them a cookie.
Come here,
Have a cookie.
Come get a cookie. Come get a cookie.
So we work in the round, and in the olden days, that could mean working on long, straight needles. When I visited the Shetland Islands, I got to see people working on the long, double-pointed needles that they would work a whole sweater on. And what they do with them is the one that they're working on with their right hand is in a belt, a knitting belt at their waist that has little holes punched in it and has a little padding, and they put the end of the first double-pointed needle that's in their right hand, and then they work it like this, and then they switch as they go along, and that allows them to work very quickly and very easily in the round on hundreds of stitches. Sometimes, if you think about some of the projects that were worked on in the Shetlands, they would make these beautiful square and round shawls in the round, and they would use double-pointed needles for the whole thing. But we're lucky we have circular needles, and so we don't have to work all of our stuff in the round. So I am going to demonstrate in the round for you guys, and what I want you to know is that you do not have to be following along. We are recording this, and you can try this demonstration at home, and you can rewatch this lesson at this point to get all of the information that you need. I'm just going to fix my stitches that have fallen off of my needle and go back. So what I did was I took a 16-inch needle and I cast on 100 stitches. I'm using a size 4 needle, so I was using a DK weight yarn. And I just cast on so I would have enough to go around. And I want to talk about the different ways that we can hold the needles and the yarn to do stranded color work, because keeping an even tension and keeping the stitches loose enough is the biggest issue with stranded color work. So I'm going to move my chart out of the way. Come back to that in a minute. So first of all, how do we hold our needles when we're doing stranded color work? Well, everybody holds their needles in their own unique way, and everybody tensions their yarn in their own unique way. You may wrap it many times around your pinky or your forefinger or all kinds of different things. I tension my yarn by grabbing it with my last 2 fingers and putting my pointer finger underneath. I'm going to raise this up a little bit so you can see a little bit better. Okay, so I grab it here and I tension like that. So it's in my right hand, and I knit by throwing, which is considered the English style. So that's just my normal knit stitch. Now, many people tension with the yarn around their left finger and they go in, and I can't do it very well. I'm not a good continental knitter, but they use the yarn over their left finger, and I have to have better tension on it so that I can make my stitches more easily. So I need that up over my joint. So those are the two methods of making the knit stitch. The purl stitch continental is something I've never really mastered, but it involves bringing the yarn forward and then maneuvering it so that you can come back through. And the purl stitch for English knitters is just a matter of bringing the yarn forward and throwing in the same direction that you normally throw. So there's not a big difference in the way that's done. When you add a second color though, you're adding a second strand of yarn. So what I wanted to demonstrate first is the different ways of carrying the two colors and the importance of where you carry them. Some people knit stranded color work and hold the yarn for both colors on one side, either the left side because they're continental knitters or the right side because they're English style knitters. So I want to demonstrate that first. I'm going to knit two colors, 2 stitches at a time, and move them as I go. So I'm just going to lay my second color across to get it started. And I'm going to hold it on the left-hand side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one yarn, over my pointer finger and one yarn over my second finger, like that. So I essentially have the yarn grabbed in the same way, the same way I normally do, but one is tensioned over the pointer finger and one is tensioned over the middle finger. And so I'm going to use those to throw. And then I slide it down to help keep the tension loose. And then I use that one to throw. Because I'm keeping the yarns in the same position, they're not going to get tangled if I do this, because I'm essentially going from underneath with the one on the left and from above with the one on the right.
So are you twisting your yarns to avoid holes as you do this?
You do not need to twist your yarns to avoid holes when you do stranded color work, because they're not like in intarsia, it's a separate piece of yarn that is not carrying across that same area. These are carrying across.
Oh, okay.
So you don't have to worry about the hole between them. So you don't want to twist them or you're going to have a terrible mess. You want to make sure that one yarn is always on the left and one yarn is always on the right. So I keep doing this wrong. There. So then I'm going to do my left. So if I do it this way, I actually won't twist my yarns at all, and they'll come out okay. So this is a way that I've done stranded color work in the past, that I've come out and it's been pretty quick. But I have a tendency to knit one of those stitches more tightly than the other. So it may not be the best method for me. The other way to do this, if you're holding both strands of yarn.
Hang on, before you go to the other way, you were talking about left and right, and I got confused. What do you mean by the left one and the right one? Yarn.
I am holding the pink to the left of the right.
Oh, so it's the relative position of the two.
Mm-hmm. So
Okay.
if you see the two balls of yarn in the picture, they're separated.
Thank you.
Okay. And in my hand, the pink one is to the left of the green one. So when I make my stitches, the green one always comes from above, and the pink one always comes from below. Do you see how this is coming from underneath the green?
Yes,
And now the
yes.
green is being carried over the pink one.
But I only see it because you're a good teacher, Beth.
Oh, well, thanks. I'm trying to demonstrate it.
It's working, it's working.
Okay. So now you could do that with the yarns in the same position relatively on, I better do this one, on the left hand. So, and I am not a continental knitter, so my demonstration will not be as perfect. But let's say you're holding both in your left hand like this, both the pink and the green. The next stitch I need to knit is the green, so I'm going to go under the pink and get it. Whoop. Not facile with this. And then I'm going to go into the pink and get it. And if you're more comfortable with left-handed knitting, that technique works better. I can't demonstrate that as well as somebody who's a natural continental knitter. But the other way that you can hold it, and is equally awkward for everybody, is to have one yarn over your left hand, which is what I've taught myself to do, and one yarn over my right hand. And that way the yarn position is always the same. The left yarn is the pink yarn, the right yarn is the green yarn in my example here. And I just come around and make my stitches, and then I dig in and make my pink stitches, and then I come around and make my green stitches. And that is a pretty straightforward way to do it. Now I've been doing this around without switching the position of the pink and the green, and there's a reason for that. The color on the left travels further. I'm not exactly sure how to demonstrate that close up, but it travels a longer distance and it becomes more prominent. So because it is more prominent, it is considered the dominant color. So the left or lower color, left for lower, is the dominant color in your pattern. So if you want something to stand out, you want to put that color on the left. So if you had a black and white pattern and you wanted the white part to stand out, you'd want the white color to be on the left, and you'd want to maintain it on the left, even if you're holding in both hands, even if it's, or in one hand, even if you're holding it from the left hand or the right hand, you'd want the color you want to be dominant to be the one that's on the left side, because that's the one that comes from below. And the one on the right is the one that comes from above. I am not holding enough tension.
Can you explain what you mean by dominant? Because obviously you might have more than one color, more of one color than another. So I'm thinking that's not what you mean.
Dominance is the color that you want to really stand out. In other words, and that might be in just two color work. I love this book because it means I don't have to knit all of the samples. Okay, here's the example that they give of dominance. Let me try and get that. These are knitted in exactly the same way. And what you can see, the bottom of the swatch, the light color was dominant. The middle of the swatch, the dark color was dominant. And the top of the swatch, the light color was dominant and both were tensioned. Oh, sorry. What a funny example. They tensioned differently in these two swatches. But if you wanted so here you can see it's sort of equal tension and equal value for each of the colors. But in these two, the top and the bottom ones, you can see that the light is more dominant here and the dark is more dominant here. So if you imagine like a Norwegian sweater with this kind of patterning in a background, if you want the light to show more in the background, in the patterning, then you want the light to be on the left-hand side.
So
If you want
dominant, I'm sorry, dominant doesn't mean it's your main color.
No, dominant is the color that you want to show the most.
To stand out, okay.
To stand out the most. And I think it's probably more important for contrast between dark and light.
Beth, can you give us the name and author of that book again?
The name of this book is The Essential Guide to Color Knitting Techniques. And the author is Margaret Radcliffe. There she is, Margaret Radcliffe. And I have another book that I bought recently that's like, it came out this year, called The Color Knitting Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And I like this one better. I was literally going from one page to the other of the two books. And I would say that Margaret Radcliffe had a better take on it. I felt like the other book was cribbing from this one.
Thank you.
I also think that the examples in this one are just so much clearer, and her illustrations are very, very good.
Great.
This is how I'm getting away with copyright infringement, because I'm referencing the book. I hope I am selling her books. I also like her, she has another book. I will totally plug her. She wrote the Knitting Answer book, and she also wrote The Knowledgeable Knitter. And I think both of those are fantastic guides to knitting. The Knowledgeable Knitter is an amazing book. Some of us read it at bedtime. Okay. So my dog's head is on my knee, like, Mom. Mom. So dominant color only really refers to the color. So like, you don't want the black to swallow the white, I think is what that means. You want, let's say you were doing stranded color work and it was a skull and crossbones, and the background was black and the skull and crossbones were white. You'd want the skull and crossbones to really stand out from the background. If you were doing something where there's even numbers of stitches and it's like a diamond pattern, you might want more even tension. So in that case, again, I would say put the light color on the left and the darker color on the right, and then try to maintain even tension. So let's talk a little bit about tension as we're knitting. I'm going to continue demonstrating with my two-handed method, but I want you to practice all the methods that feel comfortable to you. I've been in classes where a teacher will say, this is the only way to do it. And I don't feel like this is the only way to do it. I feel like the way that you can maintain your tension the most comfortably is the way to do it for you. And I can't say what way that is. Obviously, I am not as adept with my left hand. I'm better after I've done a stranded color work project, but at the beginning of it, I tend to be pretty awkward. I feel pretty awkward. I feel pretty comfortable also if I hold them. Hang on, my yarns are coming through the middle of my knitting. I also feel comfortable when I'm doing stranded color work if I hold the yarns and drop and pick them up as I go. So that would look like this. So again, I want to have the pink on the left. So I'm still keeping my colors on a side, as it were. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit with my pink over my pointer finger and then drop it down and then knit with my green. Then knit with my pink. And then knit with my green. So if you can maintain your tension easily this way, then that's a fine choice. And many people do it. So there's no bad way or right way or wrong way to do it. It's really just about how do you maintain your tension and how do you keep your yarns on one side or the other, because you don't want to be done with the row and have these two strands twisted together. See how mine are still separated? That's because I'm always pulling the left, the pink one from the left and the green one above it from the right. Whoop.
But Beth, how do you keep those two strands in on your finger like that? I tend to drop one.
That's okay, Liz. That's what I'm saying is you can drop it.
Yeah.
And then what I would do, so here's the tensioning part that I would recommend. I'm gonna get a little closer in on this. So you can see the stitches on my right hand needle. And what I recommend to create a float that is big enough, I would pull these stitches down to your right as you change the color, each time you change the color. So here I'm about to knit with my green yarn. I'm going to take it from pulled down, I'm changing color, so it has to reach across the pink ones and make the stitch. That should be enough of a float. And then I'm going to drop that. I'm going to pick up my pink. I'm going to move it down again, and I'm going to reach underneath with the pink. And that should be enough of a float. So if you're worried about your tensioning, if it seems to be too tight, picking up and dropping is fine as long as you're doing it with these pulled back as far as the elasticity of your piece will let you go. What happens, I think, there's a couple of things that can make it too tight. One, if you're on too short a needle and you don't have enough room to push it back. So a longer needle, a longer actual needle can help with that. The other thing is if you're not really working from as far back along here as you can. So push and change. Now it's much easier in a 2x2 kind of a pattern, but if we increase to something that has 7 stitches and 1, you're going to have much longer floats of one color versus the other. And I was reading about it and I was trying to come up with a good solution for people for long floats, because I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have in stranded color work. So I've been I was trying to get around all the way of my 100 stitches, but I haven't. But let's say I had a place where there was 7 stitches in a row of this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. To make the pink float long enough, I want to really push this back. Look how much further back the pink is now. And so then when I strand from there, I'm still coming from underneath. And I want to make that stitch relatively loosely and still kind of pulling back on the pink stitches here. Like that. So there's your long float. Now that float is really long, but it still might not be long enough to give real elasticity, but that's the best way that I know of creating the longest float. Some people think that you should catch your floats every time that you make a long one. So you should knit like 3 and then catch the float on the 4th one and then knit 3 more. And I have never seen that happen where it doesn't create a pucker in the knitting. So I want to demonstrate on my next round what I would recommend doing instead. And what that would be is to pick up this strand in the next row, in the next round. So pick up those long floats in the next round. And by looking at a chart, you'll know where they are. So I'm going to keep knitting around. For your exercise, if you've put 100 stitches on the needle, I want you to knit a few rounds just to get them on, and then start just doing 2 and 2. So whatever way, you can try all the different ways in your left hand, in your right hand, or in both hands, picking up and dropping the stitches as you go. Oh, look at me taking it from on top. Oh my. So if you keep twisting them, you're going to have twisted yarns and it will be hard to work with. And then once you've done a few rows of 2 by 2, you can do some rows of 4 by 4 and so on, so that you get some practice expanding the number of stitches. I'm coming to the end. I'm not going to come out to the right number now because of my demonstration, but that's okay. We'll do 3. No, wait, do 3, 2, and 1. All right, so I'm back at the beginning of my round. So we've talked about what to do if the gauge or the tension is too tight around. And you can sort of tell that because it won't stretch easily. So if you've got a reasonable tension, it shouldn't be so loose that everything is sticking out, but you should be able to pull your stitches apart. Just like if it was stockinette, you should be able to pull the stitches apart. In shaping 2-color knits, there are often rows of single colors in between a row of color. So one of the ways of doing shaping would be to wait until you're on a single color row and just do all of your shaping in there. But if you're doing increases, remember that some increases pull up a color from below. So the most invisible form of increases for stranded color work would be to do make ones left or right, or a yarn over that you twist in a subsequent row. So if you need to increase a stitch, for example, if I wanted to increase a stitch on either side of this one, well, maybe I'll get a little bit past the beginning of my round. So let's say I wanted to increase a green stitch on either side of this here. I would pick up the green yarn in between and twist it to make my new one. If I wanted it to be a pink stitch, I would pick it up with the pink. So here I can do that with the pink. I'm going to pick up the pink, that was the strand, and I'm going to twist that one to make my new color. And that will be a fairly invisible increase in my knitting. If you want to do a decrease, the decreases do actually make a little bit of a difference. So for example, if I wanted to decrease across 2 colors, if I do the knit 2 together decrease, the second stitch is going to show up on top and it's going to slant to the right. So do you see when I did that, the pink is the stitch that shows up on top? Well, that may not be what you want. You might want it to be the green stitch that shows up on top, in which case you should do an SSK, or a slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over. So I'll demonstrate that. So slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over, and now it's the green that's showing up on top. So if you wanted to keep a line of green stitches along the decrease, you would want to do an SSK or an SKP. If you want the pink stitches to be showing, you would want to do a knit 2 together. Or if you don't want any blending of the colors, you would want to do your decrease where two colors are the same, one way or the other. The other kind of decreases that we use are the double decreases. And those also can create a slant. So if we did a double decrease and we didn't want the colors to be blended, we could do an SSK like that. And then, for example, I could change colors and do a knit two together. And those would sit next to each other without blending, without sort of muddying the waters between them.
Would the pattern usually tell you?
It might, but what if you wanted to make up your own pattern?
Yeah.
What if you were making a hat and you wanted to make up your own color work pattern? So this is just like to be aware that when you do decreases, what if the pattern writer wasn't aware that her SSKs look differently? Sometimes people just write things because they know that you can decrease without really knowing what it does to the knitting. So be aware that your decreases and your increases can affect how everything looks. Also, you want to be aware of how finishing looks. So one thing I learned is that you need to move everything over one stitch to the right. So in other words, you would want to knit this stitch as pink, one stitch over to the right. If you were doing, if you were doing a cast off. So let's say I wanted to cast this off in color. I would do 2 stitches in pink, and there's one, and then I would do the next stitch in green and cast it off. And then you can see that that sits over the correct portion of the knitting. So the pink sits over the pink stitch and the green sits over the green stitch. So that was an interesting piece of information that I learned in researching this with you guys. All right, so I'm going to go back to where my stranded color work was and show you how to secure a long float. Trying to find that long float I did. Does anybody have any questions? See, Liz, I think I like it better when I pick up the yarns. And I've been knitting for a minute.
Yeah, a lot longer than me, so.
That can't be true.
Yeah.
Although if you tangle because you forgot or things rolled around, mostly I think what's happening is my yarns are rolling around. You don't want to leave it for very long. You want to untangle your yarns as you go. So I want to just talk a little bit about steeks, because I think you should know the word and know what it means in knitting. Steek is a Scottish word, and I believe it, well, I'm not sure if it means bridge, but it means bridge when you refer to it in your knitting, because it's a bridge of stitches that you make so that you can cut open stranded color work. And generally what happened is that stranded color work was done in pure wool, sometimes a very sticky kind of wool. So if you've ever felt Icelandic wool or Shetland wool. It's not sleek like merino. It's a little bit on the stickier, scratchier side. And that quality makes it really wonderful for stranded color work, because the long floats will just stick to each other and stick to the back of your knitting, and they won't get caught on your fingers. They tend to felt down. In other words, they tend to mat down on themselves as the piece is worn. And so they don't tend to be a real problem with even needing to be woven in at the ends. That if you leave the ends short, they tend to be unlikely to ever unravel because they're so sticky. And steeking came about. I've just arrived at my place. Steeking came about because people would create these bridges of stitches and then cut them up the middle and then use that to hem the fronts of a cardigan or to put sleeves in. Okay, so I'm at that, pause. We're going to return to the that long float here. So I made it a 7-stitch section. So I'm going to knit with my green yarn, and on the 4th stitch, I'm going to go under there and under my long float. So I'm just picking up the long float, and it's being caught by my knitting, and then I'm going to keep going. And it may show through a little bit, but for the most part, it won't cause a pucker if you do that. There is a danger of it showing through. I have been investigating invisible stranding. I'm not completely confident in it yet, but when I learn that technique more confidently, I'm going to teach a class on it. So here's the next long float coming across in the same place. And what I would say is if you continue to have long floats in one area, you want to stagger where they're picked up. So the next time we might pick this up on the 3rd stitch instead of the 4th stitch. And the next time after that, either go back to the 4th stitch or go to the 5th stitch, so that you're not always picking up the float in the same place, because there is a little bit of showing through when you do this. You can kind of pick it away so that that's not as likely to show through, but that's one of the disadvantages of stranded color work, having long floats. So I don't really love the kinds of patterns that leave a long float in, and I would actually recommend perhaps doing duplicate stitching for those colors that show up in the middle like that. I think that might be a better choice, or to do the invisible stranding, which just to show you, the invisible stranding is a method of creating an extra stitch in a space where there's a lot of floats and working that as a purl stitch on the other side with your alternate color. It sounds too complicated to bring into this class, but it essentially gives you double-faced fabric with the purl stitch looking like a knit stitch on the back side and keeping those floats from actually catching on the front of the fabric. So we're going to learn about that and bring that into a class. So steeks, as I was saying, are a bridge. And I did this little area of bind off here. So I'm going to just talk about, if I were to then work over to that bind off area, let's say that was my underarm bind off. So let's say I was working in my 2-color work, I'm making a pullover, and I want to have my underarm be a stitch. What you would do is create more stitches right there, and you would work them in a pattern like a checkerboard. Sometimes people do them in rib or in vertical stripes. And then what you'll do later is cut them down the center, fold the stitches back on either side, and pick up stitches along the edge to do the sleeves or to do the edging of the armholes, whichever, whether you're doing a vest or a pullover. So I just want to get to that spot.
Just the thought of cutting my knitting scares me.
I've only done it once and it was a little terrifying. And what I ended up doing was a double-faced fabric casing, and all of the ends were inside of that casing. Whoop, lost it. Okay, so if you get to this, here's my little opening. What you would do is you would do a yarn around the needle kind of thing, and you could alternate them. And both places I read about doing this suggested that you do it in an odd number so that there's a center stitch. So I just did 4, I think. So there's my 5th. And then I'm going to do 4 more. So they recommend doing 9 stitches. 3. So I'm just doing a backwards loop cast on, the simplest kind of a cast on. And see how that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then you continue in your pattern. And you can either knit those stitches as they appear, or you can knit them with your alternate color. In other words, I could knit green, pink, green, pink, green, pink, green, pink, green, or I could knit as I get to the steek, pink, green, pink, green, pink, green, pink. Doesn't matter. You just want to keep blending them so that they're stranding across this section. And then later, when I'm ready, I will cut open that area. All of my decreases, all of my underarm shaping will come along the side before the steek and after the steek. So I might want to put a marker on either side of my steek so that I know what my actual edge stitches are and I can do my shaping there. I think it's a really exciting way to do something like a vest. And I think it would be a really fun project to do because you'd be working in the round. You would minimize some of the finishing as you're working, and you'd have a chance to try something really new and terrifying when you're finished. Are there any questions? Has everybody got it?
Do you know of a easy, simple pattern that you could learn that would be easy to be a nice first project, you know, to work on? Something simple.
What about the Bernie mittens?
Oh, jeez.
You got
Well,
the
you
yarn
know,
for it. So
I did the first row. I am just doing 1 row for a pair of socks. I'm just doing 3 rows for a pair of socks.
Okay. So here, I'm going to take away my pen. If there aren't any more questions, I'm going to stop the recording so it's not too